She was crying so hard she could barely breathe. The sack over her head sucked tight with every sob, turning air into heat, into panic, into silence that screamed louder than any noose. Her hands, bound in front with frayed twine, shook against the splintered wood of the auction stage. The crowd below leered up, dust-caked men with hard jaws and hollow eyes. Some laughed, others spat. None of them saw her. Because that was the point. If you're a true Wild West soul, drop a big yes in the comments. Let's see who's still riding the trail with us. The deputy slammed his gavel against a wagon wheel like it owed him blood. "Last one for the day," he roared. "No name, no face. Sack's been on since Missouri. Claims she can cook, clean, and keep her mouth shut. Starting bid's $5. More laughter, coarse, joyless. A man shouted, "Could be a witch under there." Another barked, "Could be a corpse." Someone else, low and mean, whispered, "Could be mine." She gasped, but the sack choked it back. Her knees nearly buckled. Still, she stayed upright, somehow. The sky overhead boiled gray. The wind died. And then, boots. One pair. Heavy, slow, oh. From the back of the crowd, a man came forward. Tall, shoulders broad beneath a canvas coat, axe strapped across his back like a promise. His face was shadowed by a black-brimmed hat, but the way the crowd split to let him through said enough. This wasn't a man used to asking permission. He stopped at the base of the platform, looked up at the girl. $5, he said. Dead silence fell. The deputy blinked. "You serious?" "I said it," the man replied. No bravado, just granite certainty. "You don't want to see what you're buying?" The man raised his head slightly, not at the deputy, at her. Even with the sack, even with the shaking, he looked straight at her like she wasn't invisible. "I ain't buying a face," he said. "I'm marrying a person." No one laughed this time. The deputy cleared his throat. "Name? Silas Boone, lumberman, Northridge." The paper was shoved forward. He signed. Then the deputy turned to her. "You're wed now, miss. Say your name for the record." Silence stretched so long it frayed. Then, soft, ragged, like torn fabric catching on a nail, she spoke. "Annabelle Crow." Silas froze. His jaw clenched like a man shot through the ribs. Something flickered behind his eyes. Pain, memory, recognition. He stepped forward, reached for her arm. His hand was warm, steady. "You're safe now," he said. She didn't speak again, but the sack shifted, just slightly, and the air broke like glass around them. The trail behind Dust Ridge vanished quicker than footsteps in sand. Silas didn't speak as he led the mule along the old path, packed hard with years of wind and bone-dry weather. Annabelle followed. The sack still covered her head, flapping faintly at the edges each time the breeze dared rise. No words passed between them, just the sound of boots pressing down pine needles, the dull thump of hooves, and the brittle crack of dead twigs underfoot. The forest swallowed them inch by inch, its tall spires closing in like cathedral walls, dim in the sun until only spears of light broke through. Even the birds held their tongues. She stayed several steps behind him, hands still bound, though not cruelly. He hadn't tightened the rope, but neither had he untied it. Silas didn't look back, not out of coldness. He simply knew the sound of someone still following, trusted it. The deeper they walked, the quieter everything became. Not peaceful, just watchful. The trees bore witness like old men in pews, judging nothing, remembering everything. It was nearly dusk when the cabin emerged, tucked into a rise of earth like it had grown there. Logs stacked with purpose, not pride. A stone chimney leaned slightly but held firm. Firewood piled to the side, chopped clean, a rusted horseshoe above the door. Silas reached the porch, turned. and waited. Annabelle stopped just beyond the steps. The sack shifted slightly, but she did not lift it. Her posture was careful, as if the earth beneath her might shift if she moved too freely. He opened the door with a low creak and stepped aside. "You pick where you stand," he said. His voice was even, not gentle, not stern, just steady, like the trees around them. Annabelle hesitated, then climbed the steps, slowly, 1 foot at a time, like the wood might bite. Inside, the air was warm with ash and old timber. She crossed the room, silent as shadow, and crouched near the far wall, not hiding, not surrendering, just settling where her back could rest against something solid. Silas didn't approach her. He set the firewood by the hearth, lit a match, and coaxed the flame alive with practiced hands. The light grew. So did the quiet. He didn't offer her water or bread or a chair, only space, only fire. She didn't remove the sack. He didn't ask her to. When the kettle finally whistled, it sounded louder than thunder. Still, she did not flinch, but her breathing slowed, just a little. And for the first time since the auction block, she let her hands fall open in her lap. The scent came slowly, smoke first, then spice. Something warm steeped in something older, meat laced with memory. Silas moved through the kitchen like a man who'd done it too many times to need thought. He didn't hum, didn't mutter, only stirred and cut and poured, the clink of spoon on tin echoing like distant chimes. Annabelle hadn't moved from her place by the wall, sack still over her head, arms folded around her knees. She watched the floorboards more than him, but her breath had steadied. When the stew was ready, he ladled it into 2 wooden bowls. One he set near the hearth, not close enough to touch her, but close enough to choose. The other he carried to the table and sat down, shoulders hunched, not in weariness, but in habit. He took a slow bite, then another. Steam curled from the bowls like tiny ghosts between them. After a time, her voice came, muffled but clear. "What is this?" He looked into his bowl, stirred once. "I call it the meal for the last one standing." There was a pause. A sound escaped from under the sack. Not quite a laugh, not quite a breath, but close enough to both to matter. "I used to make it after long days in the woods," he said. "At first, just for me. Later, I started making 2 bowls, even when there wasn't anyone to fill the other." She turned her head slightly, not enough to reveal, just enough to glance. Beside him, the second bowl sat untouched on the table. The seat next to it was empty. "I'd set it out," he continued, "for my wife, after the war, after the trees took more than they gave. I never said much, just made sure it was there. A way to remind myself I was still alive." Annabelle didn't respond, but her fingers moved, just slightly. Then she reached forward and took the bowl from the floor. She didn't lift the sack, didn't ask for a spoon. She raised it beneath the cloth, careful, slow. The first bite was hesitant, the second less so. Silas said nothing more, just kept eating, slow and steady, like sharing a meal was more ceremony than hunger. When she finished, she placed the bowl beside her. Her head remained bowed, but she didn't curl in on herself, not anymore. That night, while Silas washed the dishes in a tin basin, Annabelle stayed by the wall, silent, watching. But for the first time since she stepped into the cabin, she was not trembling. The fire cracked low in the hearth, and Silas sat before it, elbows on his knees, staring into the flames, like they held answers instead of ash. The cabin was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that brought sleep. This silence reached deeper, into the bones, into the places that only woke when memory stirred. It had been 3 years ago, maybe more. Deep winter, when even the sky felt frozen and breath turned to glass. He'd gone too far north chasing a vein of good timber, greedier than sense would allow. A misstep on a ridge, a twisted leg, a fall through ice-crusted brush into snow so deep it muffled the world. He remembered thinking that was how it ended. Cold, alone, face down in powder that didn't care. But then, hands. Rough, small, calloused, dragging, pulling. His body had screamed from the jolt, but he couldn't fight, couldn't do anything but let himself be moved. Darkness came, then firelight. He'd woken to the hiss of wet wood on flame and the bitter scent of boiled bark. The cave was small, hidden behind a veil of icicles and stone. Across from him sat a figure, a woman by the shape of her frame. Wrapped in patched wool and stitched leather, boots made from scraps, every inch of her cloaked in survival. Her face was hidden beneath a sack, tied firm at the neck, shadowed even by the firelight. She hadn't spoken at first, just offered him a tin cup, steam rising from the strange brew within. "You do not need to know who I am," she'd said. Her voice was low, calm, not unkind. "But I'm not going to let you die." He'd tried to speak, failed. "Drink, pine bark and lichen. It will help the fever." He remembered the taste, sharp, like old earth and iron. He drank, then slept. When he woke again, she was gone. But the fire had been fed. Stones still warm against his bandaged leg, and beside him lay a square of cloth, folded tight. On it, crooked stitches of tiny purple flowers, each petal trembling in thread. He'd kept it, never really knew why. Folded in the inside pocket of his coat. Through seasons of rain, through days without sun. Now, 3 years later, in the glow of his own hearth, he could still hear that voice. And tonight, that voice had spoken again, not in memory, in truth, on a wooden platform with the sack still drawn tight. Annabelle Crow. He didn't need proof, not her face, not even the flowers, just her breath, her voice, the shape of it in the dark. It was her, the woman who had saved his life. And now she sat not in a cave, but against his wall, hidden still, but not lost. The morning came in quiet, no wind, no bird song, just a thin line of gold threading through the chink above the window, slicing the dimness in two. The fire had gone low in the stove, and Silas was already outside, oiling the teeth of his saw with slow, even strokes. Inside, the cabin breathed with warmth that had nothing to do with flame. Annabelle rose from her cot. Her hair, long and tangled from sleep, spilled unevenly across her back. She stretched her hands, felt the ache in her knuckles, then crossed to the table. And there it was, a mirror, small, silver-framed, worn at the corners. It leaned against a wedge of pine, angled just right to catch the light without glaring. Beside it, folded clean and soft, lay a scarf, the color of riverstone kissed with sea green, the kind of fabric no one wasted on someone they planned to ignore. She stood still for a long time. Then, with slow fingers, she reached behind her neck. The knot in the sackcloth resisted, as if it too had learned how to hold on. But it loosened, gave, slid up, inch by inch. She didn't rush. She couldn't. The world had not ended in one blow. It would not begin again in one gesture. Her face came free. She stared at herself, not in horror, not even in grief, just stillness, like recognizing a ghost and knowing it was hers. The scar began at her temple and curved down, jagged as lightning, ending just above her jaw. It was old but deep, flesh that had healed, but not without story. Her fingers brushed it lightly, not to hide it, not to test it, but to name it. She looked and kept looking. Then she lifted the scarf. It slid through her fingers like water. Cool, soft, alive. She tied it round her head, not to cover the scar, but to shape what others would see. Her way, her terms. The door creaked behind her. She didn't flinch. Silas stood there, one hand on the frame. He hadn't meant to watch, but he had, and he didn't look away. Their eyes met. Not a word passed between them. None was needed. He saw her, not the scar, not the sack, her. And nothing in his face changed, except maybe the way his jaw softened, the way his breath eased. She looked back at the mirror one more time. This time she didn't search for the wound. She found the woman behind it. The sky was overcast that evening, the clouds hanging low like they, too, carried secrets too heavy to lift. Inside the cabin, soup simmered quietly, steam coiling like ghost breath above the pot. Silas stirred with one hand, his other resting on the worn edge of the stove. Behind him, Annabelle stood near the wall, arms folded. She wasn't hiding anymore, but she wasn't yet fully standing in the light. "I suppose you should know," she said. Her voice was calm, not cold, but stripped of everything soft, like bark peeled from a tree to show the bare grain beneath. Silas didn't turn. He let the spoon move slow through the broth. "The man who ran the boarding house," she continued, "told me I could stay if I gave extra." Her fingers tightened against her arms. "I said no." The wind scraped against the outside wall like nails dragging along bark. He didn't like that. Came at me in the kitchen, grabbed my arm, tried to push me down on the table. I fought, pushed back. He slipped, hit his head on the stove. She paused, swallowed. The words caught there like splinters in her throat. "He died. They said I lured him, that I planned it." She looked down, voice quieter. "No one believed me. Not the constable, not the housekeeper. They called me a liar, a temptress, a murderer." Silas set the spoon aside, quiet, still not turning. "They gave me to the sheriff to settle debts. I went from cell to wagon, from name to no name. Every stop someone else made a decision about what I was worth. They put the sack on in Topeka, said it made things easier. If you're a true Wild West soul, drop a big yes in the comments. Let's see who's still riding the trail with us." She looked toward the fire, the flames catching faint on the silver of the mirror. "I wore it so they wouldn't look at me like poison, so they wouldn't see the scar and decide who I was before I even spoke." She waited then for judgment, for silence to harden again. But Silas turned. He didn't move toward her, didn't speak right away. He only looked, and when he did speak, it was plain, steady. "Thank you." Annabelle blinked. "You didn't have to tell me," he said, "but you did." She nodded just once. Then she sat. Not curled, not crouched, sat, like the floor belonged to her too. He returned to the stove, ladled soup into 2 bowls, and set one in front of her. She took it with both hands. Their silence after that was not hollow. It was shared. The storm didn't start with thunder. It came quieter than that. Hoof beats on dry ground, the smell of leather and steel, and the kind of silence that made dogs nervous. He rode in alone beneath a sky the color of old bruises. Long coat torn at the edges, hat pulled low, rifle slung tight against his back like a warning. His horse was lean, dust-streaked, ribs showing under the saddle. No wasted motion, no wasted words. He called himself Cutter. At the saloon, he ordered nothing. Just leaned against the bar, eyes sharp and gray, listening. He didn't smile, didn't scowl, just read every face, every lie, until he found what he needed. "I heard tell of a man out in the woods," he said low. name a boon, keeps to himself, and maybe, just maybe, he ain't alone. No one answered him directly, but fear has a scent, and Cutter was the kind of man who knew how to track it. By the time word reached Silas, hours later, half whispered through the blacksmith's apprentice, it was already too late to pretend the forest would stay quiet. He didn't say anything when he got home, just dropped his axe by the door and stood in the threshold like he wasn't sure whether to come in or burn the place down. "He's hunting you," he said. Annabelle looked up from the hearth, where she'd been mending a fraying seam in her skirt. She didn't blink, didn't speak. Silas crossed the room, knelt by the stove, ran a hand through his beard like trying to smooth something that wouldn't stay down. "He's asking questions, the kind you don't ask unless you already know the answers." Annabelle stood, crossed to the chest at the foot of the cot, lifted the lid. Inside, folded like memory, lay the old sackcloth. She stared at it. "You don't have to," Silas said. "Not ever again." She shook her head once, firm. "This time," she said, "I choose it." She lifted the sack, ran her hands over the frayed edges, like reading a story only she could understand. "Not to hide," she added, quieter now. "To draw him out." Silas watched her, his face unreadable. But something in his shoulders loosened, not relief, not defeat, respect. They laid the plan in the hush of evening, maps traced in ash and breath. Annabelle would ride east, alone, covered. The hunter wouldn't resist a girl with a story on her face and shame over her head. But this time, shame wasn't the truth, it was bait. The sky was pale with dawn when Annabelle mounted the horse. The sack was drawn over her head again, tied firm at the neck, her breath warm and steady beneath the cloth. She wore no weapon, carried no food, just the clothes on her back and the memory of everything that had come before. Silas adjusted the stirrup, checked the cinch twice. His hands were rough but sure. When he looked up, he didn't ask her if she was ready. She already was. She turned east, toward the fire road, where the trees thinned and the ground opened like a wound. Her horse moved quick under her, hooves silent on the soft trail. She didn't look back. Cutter followed by noon. He rode hard, dust rising in a single ribbon behind him. The sack had done its work, drawn him like a blade to the scent of blood. A girl alone, scarred, covered, running. She knew he would chase her, men like him always did. But she wasn't running. By late afternoon, she reached the rise above Bitter Creek, the place they'd chosen. Below, in the narrow gorge, Silas waited with the sheriff and 2 riflemen from Ridge Patrol. Shadows moved through the trees like watchful ghosts, but she kept still, reins in hand, breath held. She heard him before she saw him. Cutter's horse snarled against the bridle, kicking stones as they slid down the slope. His coat flared behind him like the wings of a hawk in dive. She let him come close, close enough to see the tension in his jaw, the gleam of certainty in his eyes. That was his mistake. When he raised his rifle, Silas stepped from the pines. "Drop it," he said. The words hit like thunder. Cutter turned, snarled, but before the shot could leave the chamber, 3 others had theirs trained on his chest. The sheriff barked a command. The rifle fell to the ground with a clatter that echoed too long. They bound his wrists, yanked him off his horse. He cursed like a man who thought cruelty would shield him. It didn't. Not here. Annabelle watched from the ridge, sack still on, her hands clenched tight around the reins. She didn't smile, didn't weep. Just watched, still and upright, as the man who had chased shadows met the shape of truth. Only when he was gone, dragged off on his own horse, wrists bloodied, mouth spitting dust, did she ride down the hill. Silas stepped toward her. She reached up and untied the knot. The sack slid free. She folded it once, then again, and looked at him with eyes clear as the winter sky. "It saved me one last time," she said. He nodded, and in that moment, the choice she had made wrapped itself around her like armor, not of cloth, but of courage. The knock came just after supper, not loud, not urgent. Just 3 slow taps, each one softer than the last. Silas opened the door to a woman standing alone on the porch, her dress stained with trail dust, her hat clutched in both hands like it held more weight than fabric could bear. "My name's Mavis," she said. Her voice was low, a little hoarse. "Mavis Green. I used to work at the Ridley house, in the kitchen." Behind Silas, Annabelle stepped into the doorway. The moment she saw the woman, she froze. Mavis flinched but held her ground. "I heard you were up here," she said, eyes not leaving Annabelle's, "and I figured it was time I stopped being a coward." The wind moved through the pines, quiet and steady, like it too was listening. "I saw what happened that night," Mavis said. "I saw him grab you, drag you into that back room. I heard the scream, heard the crash." She looked down at her hands. "I didn't say anything. I needed the job. I needed to eat. So I kept my mouth shut." Annabelle didn't speak, didn't move, but something in her gaze shifted, like the edge of a blade being turned not away, but downward. "I'm not proud of that," Mavis whispered, "but I can make it right, if you'll let me." Later, at the table, they sat with tea between them, steam curling around the words Mavis finally found the courage to say. She told everything, the bruises she saw the next day, the blood wiped clean too fast, the way the housekeeper locked the kitchen door and told her not to ask questions. Silas wrote it down, each word slow and careful, the way you'd write a truth the world had once tried to erase. Mavis signed the affidavit with a trembling hand, but her name came out bold, like it too had waited to be spoken. They sealed the letter that night, tied it with twine, and sent it with the sheriff's courier at first light. No promises, no fanfare. Just paper and ink and the weight of a voice finally heard. Annabelle walked Mavis to the edge of the clearing. Neither woman said much, but just before parting, Mavis placed a hand over Annabelle's. "You were telling the truth," she said. Annabelle nodded. "I always was." They held that moment like breath and let it go together. The sheriff came just past noon, dust on his shoulders and a single envelope in his hand. He didn't dismount, just sat there for a long moment, looking down at Silas, who stood by the woodpile with an axe frozen mid-swing. "She'll want to open it herself," the sheriff said, and passed it over. Inside the cabin, Annabelle was sorting dried herbs, fingers steady, breath measured. When Silas stepped in, she turned before he spoke. She saw the envelope, the wax seal, the way his thumb hovered just above the edge. He held it out. She didn't hesitate. She broke the seal clean. There were only a few lines, no embellishments, no poetry, just law on paper. "All charges against Annabelle Crow are hereby dismissed. Warrant rescinded. Case closed." She read it once, then again. Her hands didn't shake, but something inside her did. Something so long coiled tight it no longer knew how to unfold. She set the letter down, crossed the room in silence, and stepped outside. The air was cool, touched with the edge of spring. Birds called from high branches. The pines rustled like old friends stretching after sleep. She walked past the horses, past the garden rows still waiting to be planted, down the slope where moss ran thick and soft. Her steps found the trail by memory alone. At the edge of the clearing stood the pine, the one she had once crouched beneath, sack tight around her face, breath locked behind fear. She sat at its base, let her back rest against the bark, ran her fingers through the earth until she found it, soft linen folded and buried shallow. The sack. She pulled it free, looked at it in her lap. Then she breathed. full, open, like someone who had never truly done so until now. The wind moved through her hair, no knot at the neck, no fabric pressing her breath back down her throat, just air, hers. She didn't cry, she didn't laugh. She simply was alive, whole, unchained. Behind her, the trees stood tall and still, not to hide her, but to hold her. She closed her eyes, and in the hush between heartbeats, she whispered, "I don't have to run. Not anymore." The sack rested in her lap, no longer a symbol of what had been done to her, but a relic of what she had survived, what she had risen through, what she had reclaimed. And when she stood again, she didn't leave it behind. She folded it with care and carried it, not as shame, but as proof. Spring came slow and certain. The trees wore soft buds like promises, and the forest floor, once brittle and brown, stirred with green. Mist still rolled in at dawn, but it rose gently now, more breath than fog. Even the river, quiet through the long cold, found its voice again. Silas worked in silence, as he always did. He built the arch with pine from the ridge, beams smoothed by hand, joined with care. No carvings, no grandeur, just strength, just grace. He draped linen across the top and left the corners open so the wind could move through. Annabelle watched him from the cabin, her hands busy with thread and needle. The sack lay spread across her lap, washed, dried, cut into long strips. Her stitches were small, deliberate, steady. She didn't try to hide the weave or erase the past from its fabric. Instead, she traced it, honored it. Every thread held a breath she'd once held back. Now, she wove it forward. The veil was soft when it was done, lighter than she expected, like even it had shed weight. They married as the sun tilted west, its light gold and forgiven. Not many came, but those who mattered did. Mavis arrived in a borrowed dress, wildflowers in her braid. The blacksmith brought bread and a bottle of apple brandy. The shopkeeper's wife pressed lavender into Annabelle's palm with a look that said everything words couldn't. There was no priest, no page to read from, just Silas, waiting beneath the arch, hands folded, jaw clean-shaven for the first time in years. He wore his best shirt, pressed smooth beneath his coat. But when he saw her, he forgot all that. Annabelle stepped into the clearing with the veil over her head, not to hide, to crown. The wind caught its edge and lifted it slightly, showing the line of her scar like it belonged there, like it always had. Silas reached for her hands, held them like something precious, not fragile. "No matter what covered your face," he said, voice steady as timber, "you were always the woman I chose." She smiled, not cautious, not small, but full. "And now," he added, "you are the woman I vow to stand beside to the end." When they kissed, it wasn't for show. It was for silence answered, for fire survived, for freedom claimed. Mavis leaned close to the blacksmith and whispered, "It's not the sack." She smiled, eyes damp and proud. It's what she turned it into.